Good morning, dear friends, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship at Stony Brook, located on the ancestral lands of the Settlecott peoples. My name is June Cerveni, and I am happy to be leading worship this morning, along with our guest, Dr. Jarrett Drake, the chair of our Racial Concerns Committee, Barbara Coley, and other members of the committee. The rest of today's worship team is listed in your order of service, and we are so thankful to all of those who help us worship together. Whether you are here in our sanctuary or attending online, we are one congregation. So let's say hi and wave to those folks who are joining us from home. And a special welcome to those of you who are here for the first time this morning or are just visiting. We're glad that you're here and look forward to getting to know you. If you raise your hand, we'll be able to greet you at social hour after the service. Anyone? If you're comfortable. Anyway, for those of you here, please plan to do join us for coffee and conversation after the service. And for those who are online, if you sign off when we finish and return to our website or our news feed, you will find a link for joining a small group chat. So whether you are here or online, you will find some friendly folks who can answer any questions that you may have. At any time during the service, you are invited to place a pebble in the water on the side table over there to your right, which symbolizes a joy or a concern, a promise, a release. It sends ripples of your intention out into the world and connects us with others. As part of our annual stewardship campaign, I will now ask Isaac Allison to share with us a UU Minute. There, and you just move it up and down.
Oh God, this thing's on. When I first came to the fellowship, the best part for me was the sweets at coffee hour. It's not like that anymore. I'm not 5, but back then, a little kid doesn't really appreciate the fellowship. In the Tiny Tots group, we just played with toys. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, just that, it's different than being in the main service. Even in the elementary school group, I never really felt a lot of spiritual connection to the place. I never really felt like a part of this congregation. But in the middle school group, that started to change. Starting in the 5th grade, we stayed in the main service until the time for all ages, as we do now. It meant that I spent a lot more time in the service than before. I got to stay for the whole thing when we came in the summer. Once there was a time when they asked newcomers to raise their hand, but I wasn't paying attention, so I thought everyone was supposed to raise their hand. So I raised mine. Everyone laughed. Sometimes Mom thought I might be interested in the topic of the service, so I stayed. One case of that was on the first Sunday last January when they first started doing the UU Minutes, and after that service, I signed up to make a pledge. I wondered to myself, why? But then I figured it out. As I spent more time in the main service, I grew to be a part of the congregation. I wanted to support it because I wanted to do my part as a member of this congregation, just like anyone who has made a pledge or served on a committee or on a discussion group. Everyone needs a community to be a part of. That is why I signed up to do this UU Minute, why I stand on this stage in front of you, to signify that I truly am a member of this congregation, just like all of you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Isaac. Let us enter into the sacred space of worship with the sounding of the morning bell. May the vibrations help us to release all of our concerns and distractions, open our hearts and our minds, and bring us fully into the present moment.
There's a change to your order of service. We're moving the first song to the end and the other songs down. So we will start with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and then We'll Build a Land, and we'll end with Sifa Mandla. The free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of the things unknown but longed for still, and a tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and she names the sky her own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams, her shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. Her wings are clipped and her feet are tied, so she opens her throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of the things unknown but longed for still, and a tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of the things unknown but longed for still, and a tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom.
I have asked Joel Diamond to share the words for chalice lighting this morning, and Janet Keys Garrison to light our chalice. But I don't see Joel, so I will read the words. The flaming chalice is the symbol of the faith that holds us. As we light our chalice on this cold winter morning, may the light and warmth of the flame we kindle here renew us in courage and illuminate our way as we strive to bring into being a world of justice and reconciliation.
As we gather this morning to celebrate African American history and culture, so many bad things occupy the foreground. 47's administration, ICE, job loss, health care costs, staggering income inequality, and disappearing mental health services, to name just a few. Be that as it is, and it is, today we remember American history through the lens of the challenges that African Americans faced and their achievements. The only way to consider the African American population as a whole is to acknowledge the economic and social differences and inequality that exists not only among us, but also in the larger American society. Nevertheless, we share pride in victories over injustice and deep sorrow at losses visited on members of our communities. Our gay, lesbian, trans, and bi siblings, people who are affluent, and those who are economically challenged. As Americans, as descendants of people enslaved, the fruits of our labor were enjoyed by the enslavers and their descendants. Post-slavery times meant ongoing theft, parceled out in discrimination. And still, we rose to show what achievement is. Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells-Barnett, Toni Morrison, their priceless gifts of themselves to America made America better. Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Thurgood Marshall, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and now Muhammad Ali on a forever stamp. We keep on keeping on. In spite of the barriers created to limit us, we continue to achieve, and in our achievement, bless America. No doubt about it, we had allies, and we need them still. So today, we turn our gaze to our ancestors, to our families, and to our friends. We dance each other welcome. Come, let us worship together.
So please rise in body or in spirit, and we will sing our first hymn, which is number 1007 in the Teal Hymnal. It's called There's a River Flowin' in My Soul. This hymn was written, as our hymnal tells us, by Rose Saunders, who's otherwise known as Faya Ora Rose Torre, an activist and a lawyer who was the first Black woman judge in the state of Alabama. She's also a songwriter and especially loves to work with children. She wrote this song to encourage young children to resist white supremacy culture. She wanted them to realize that the river of history flowing through them stretches all the way back to antiquity, and that their whole being matters, soul, heart, and mind. The image and inspiration of this song was from the famous Langston Hughes poem, The Negro Speaks of Rivers. Now you'll notice this song, there's 3 verses, and then at the end of the 3rd verse, there's a closing passage in which we repeat, there's a river flowing in my soul. So that's number 1007.
Today we're looking at African American history, and today the Time for All Ages story is about one of the great figures in that history, Ida B. Wells-Barnett. The book we're reading this morning was written by her great-granddaughter, Michelle Duster. It's called Ida B. Wells, Voice of Truth. Some people refer to my great-grandmother, Ida B. Wells, as a boss. She was an educator, a journalist, a feminist, a businesswoman, a newspaper owner, a public speaker, a suffragist, a civil rights activist, and a women's club leader. She was a founder of the NAACP, a founder of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs, a founder of the Alpha Suffrage Club, and a founder of the Negro Fellowship League. She wrote, she spoke, she traveled. She challenged the racist and sexist norms of her time that often involved violence and terror. Although she endured enormous criticism and threats to her life, she never gave up. She fought for equality and justice for almost 50 years. Ida B. Wells was born into slavery in Holly Springs, Mississippi, on July 16, 1862. At just 16 years old, Ida lost both of her parents and a younger brother in a yellow fever epidemic. Even though she was just a teenager, she assumed the enormous responsibility of taking care of her 5 remaining siblings. She started her career as a teacher in rural Mississippi, then moved to Memphis, where she continued to teach. Ida also began writing for church newsletters. She wrote about social and political issues of the time. One day in 1884, when Ida was in her early 20s, she was riding a train when the conductor asked her to move from the ladies' car to the colored car, which doubled as the smoking car. Ida refused, and she was thrown off the train. Rather than cower to the powers that be, she wrote about the incident in the newspaper, and she sued the Chesapeake, Ohio, and Southwestern Railroad. She won the case and was awarded $500, though it was appealed all the way to the Tennessee Supreme Court. Almost 2.5 years later, the ruling was overturned in favor of the railroad, and Ida B. Wells was accused of harassing the company. While still teaching, Ida became co-owner of the Memphis Free Speech newspaper and built up a following as a writer. She expressed her frustration with separate and unequal school systems and wrote about it. And then she lost her teaching job. So Ida got busy traveling around the area selling subscriptions for the newspaper. Ida's life completely changed on March 9th, 1892. 3 of her enterprising friends who owned a grocery store, which rivaled a white-owned store, were lynched. Ida B. Wells knew that her friends, Thomas Moss, Calvin McDowell, and William Stewart, were only guilty of being economic rivals to a white-owned business. At the time, it was common to accuse black men of other crimes to justify lynching. But Ida recognized that the murder of her friends had nothing to do with any crime. She realized that lynching was used to keep the black community in an economically and socially inferior position. Ida exposed the truth about why her friends were killed, urging black people in Memphis to boycott streetcars and to boycott street boycott streetcars and white-owned businesses, and also to pack up their stuff and head to Oklahoma. Even though the people from the streetcar company warned her to stop, Ida continued to speak out. While she was out of town in Philadelphia, her printing press was destroyed, and she was threatened to be killed on sight. She lost everything she had ever owned, and she never returned to Memphis. Ida went on to New York City, where she worked with T. Thomas Fortune on his New York Age newspaper. She wrote pamphlets about the reality of lynching and started speaking publicly about its horrors, both in the United States and abroad. In 1895, she married attorney and newspaper owner Ferdinand L. Barnett, and she did what few married women did at that time. She hyphenated her last name, becoming Ida B. Wells-Barnett. She and her husband had 4 children together. Ida B. Wells was involved in the suffrage movement. She started the first kindergarten for black children in Chicago, and she worked to stop the racial segregation of schools. She founded and managed the Negro Fellowship League, which provided housing and job assistance to black men who migrated from the South to Chicago. Wherever she saw injustice or inequality, Ida raised her voice and did what she could to effect change. She died at age 68 on March 25th, 1931. Ida B. Wells spent her life fighting for justice and equality. She truly believed that exposing injustice would lead to change. The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them, she said. Even in the face of threats and criticism, she refused to be silent. She refused to make herself small. She stood up, spoke out, and she made a difference for all.
So could we now please join together to sing the children out to their classrooms with the Reeb Children's Benediction, which is found on the inside back cover of your hymnals, either hymnal. Let us enter into a time of meditation. We'll begin with spoken words from And Yet You Persist by the Reverend Gretchen Haley, and then we will have a time of silent meditation. Peter and Dee Dee will bring us out of the silence with hymn number 123 in the gray hymnal, Spirit of Life, and we'll remain seated for that hymn. If you do not know it by heart, you may wish to open your gray hymnal now to that page. Let us begin. Although you have been warned and given plenty of explanations and reasons to do otherwise, you have persisted to claim a life of joy and justice, to carve out this time, this space for the renewal of your own heart. Despite all the reasons, the resistance fighting for your attention and luring you toward fear, you persist to practice gratitude for this day that has been given, this chance to begin again. And so let us breathe together, that we might offer one another courage, strength, healing, hope, and this promise to persist in kindness, to persevere in compassion, and to prevail in a life that is for more than ourselves. I ask Louie Ann Windy to share an invitation to the offering.
It is our spiritual practice to share the offering plate with an organization working for a more just future. For the month of February, our share plate recipient is Racism, a great Long Island organization celebrating its 25th year. Their mission is to expose forms of racial discrimination, advocate for laws that eliminate racial disparities, and increase understanding of how structural racism impacts our communities and our region. It is well documented that the inevitable inequitable treatment and outcomes in public education, housing, and community development exist. Erase Racism strives to address these issues through research, educating the public, public advocacy on local and state levels, through legal action. Their efforts have focused especially on school education and housing. They are fostering the next generation of community leaders through their Long Island Leaders of Tomorrow program of high school students. Please give with generosity to this worthy organization. Those online may be able to make a donation through the link that is in the chat. A board member will now receive the offering.
We'll build a land where we bind up the broken. We'll build a land where the captives go free, where the oil of gladness dissolves all mourning. Oh, we'll build a promised land that can be. Come build a land where people together, anointed by love, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll build a land where we bring the good tidings to all the afflicted and all those who mourn. We'll give them garlands instead of ashes. Oh, we'll build a land where peace is born. Come build a land where people together, anointed by love, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. We'll be a land building up ancient cities, raising up devastations from old, restoring ruins of generations. Oh, we'll build a land of people so bold. Come build a land where people together, anointed by love, may then create peace, where justice shall roll down like waters, and peace like an ever-flowing stream. Come build a land where the mantles of praises resound from spirits once faint and once weak, where like oaks of righteousness coast and her people. Oh, come build the land, my people, we seek. You know it, sing it. Come build the land, where sisters and brothers, anointed by God, may then peace, for justice shall flow around like waters, and peace like a flowing stream.
Thank you so much. So we look to this bowl of pebbles. We acknowledge these pebbles and their ripples, which we see before us. May those ripples carry all of our shared joys and sorrows, reminding us that we are connected and that we hold each other in love and caring.
Lord knows we've sat through introductions brimming with the speaker's laudable achievements and wondered when the speaker would speak. Well, before that happens, I have this to say about Professor Jarrett Drake. I am proud to have the honor of introducing him for reasons too numerous to mention, save one or two. He does academic and social justice work that needs doing. And he is a student of and a teacher of the blues. Dr. Drake graduated from Benjamin Banneker Elementary School in Gary, Indiana. He earned his BA in history from Yale and his MSI in archives and records management from the University of Michigan. He did not stop there. He earned his PhD in social anthropology from Harvard University. Then, putting his education to good use, he worked as an archivist and librarian in institutional and non-institutional contexts. At Princeton University, he worked with a People's Archive of Police Violence in Cleveland and taught as a volunteer instructor in the Princeton Prison Teaching Initiative. Currently, Dr. Drake is working on 2 research projects. The first considers how incarceration in Louisiana and Mississippi impact family and friendship dynamics. The second explores blues legacy in and around Gary, Indiana, and Memphis, Tennessee. Both places carry close ancestral ties to Dr. Drake. I am blessed by time to present the Racial Concerns Committee's guest speaker in honor of African American history and culture, Dr. Jarrett Drake.
Good morning, everyone. I am extremely humbled and appreciative of the chance to speak to you this morning. As I pull up my notes, I just wanted to begin with a few opening grounding remarks. First, to state that while we are in a brutal and chilling cold, both from a climate standpoint and obviously from a political standpoint, I don't know about you all, but I worship a God who has taught me that fire can melt ice. The tradition with which I will be speaking, teaching, reaching, and preaching today is the Black liberatory tradition. It's a Black prophetic tradition that extends to time immemorial, and I will do my best to tell you the truth as best I know it. So today, I've prepared for you remarks that I have entitled, Strike a Match. As we draw closer to the country's 250th birthday, it's a good time to reflect and look back. This upcoming July 4th will mark 250 years since slave owners inked a document declaring all men are created equal. Their words came amid a war popularly known as the American Revolution, or even more misleadingly, the War of Independence. But the battle between Britain and its 13 North American colonies was neither a revolution nor a fight for independence. It was a war for slavery. The British and the Americans both recognized it then, yet it is we, nearly 250 years later, who have missed the message. Slave owners from Virginia, Massachusetts, New York, and South Carolina broke from the British to protect the system of slavery, which imposes a sentence of social death, built primarily upon violence, the severance of social ties, and dishonor. Some argue that slavery stains the Constitution, but I argue that slavery supports the Constitution. Slavery is not a contradiction of the American experiment, it is the cause of the American experiment. Thus, we might more rightly reframe the American Revolution as the first American war for slavery. And perhaps nobody knew this better than a man whose name I expect everyone in this room to know, but whose ideas are less known, and that is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was born on the eastern shore of Maryland on or around February 14th of 1818, and we don't know his exact birth date because the idea of recording a slave's birthday was as incomprehensible as recording the birthday of a shovel. Douglass's birth and early years get at the heart of what slavery did. His enslaved mother was violated by her enslaver, and yet when Douglass was born, he was kept captive on a plantation 6 miles away from her. Again, the cruelty of slavery was not just that it was forced labor, the cruelty was the violence, family separation, and dishonor. Douglass, for his part, returned the violence back to his captors. There's a scene in his first autobiography where he raises up to strike back against the notorious slave breaker who has tormented him like no other. Douglass's physical domination of the slave breaker marks a breakthrough. For the first time, he realizes his oppressor can bleed too. Of course, Douglass would later run away from slavery and become the world's most well-known advocate against slavery. He published autobiographies, he lectured before mostly white audiences, and he used his Rochester home as a hub for the Underground Railroad. And among his prolific and prodigious output, there stands from Douglass a poignant message for us here in 2026. That message came on July 5th of 1852. On July 5th of 1852, Frederick Douglass was asked to speak to an audience assembled at Corinthian Hall in his home city of Rochester. The occasion was to mark what has become known as Independence Day, but what I have argued should be known as Slavery Day. My argument is supported in part by Douglass's speech that day in Rochester. Entitled, What to the Slave is the 4th of July, Douglass condemned slavery on moral and religious grounds, calling the 4th a complete hypocrisy. He said, and I quote, "What to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days of the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is a constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham." Douglass continued, quote, "There is not a nation of the earth guilty of practices more shocking and bloody than are the people of these United States at this very hour." He went on to say, quote, "For revolting barbarity and shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival," end quote. Now, these are words that could have been written today, and unfortunately, they would still make a lot of sense. Douglass continues by enumerating the pillars of slavery. On violence, he would ask, quote, "Am I to argue that it is wrong to beat slaves with sticks, to flay their flesh with a lash, to load their limbs with irons, to hunt them with dogs, to knock out their teeth, to burn their flesh, to starve them into obedience and submission to their masters?" On family separation, Frederick Douglass asked, "Am I to argue that it is wrong to keep them ignorant of their relations to their fellow men, to sunder their families?" And on the slave as a dishonored person, Douglass would ask, "Must I undertake to prove that the slave is a man?" End quote. Now, the timing of Douglass's speech is important. Just 2 years prior, in 1850, Congress authorized the latest iteration of fugitive slave laws. Laws that, in fact, were present in the U.S. Constitution because, again, the War of Independence was a war for slavery. The 1850 version of the fugitive slave law differed in that it provided, for the first time in American history, a federal police force whose job it was to hunt, detain, and deport so-called illegals. All right, I'm going to say that again. The 1850 version of the fugitive slave law was the first time in American history that a federal police force had the job to hunt, detain, and deport so-called illegals. All right, I will repeat that for the third time. A federal police force was created in 1850 to hunt, detain, and deport so-called illegals. Somebody in here might get the message of what I'm trying to say today, okay? So the 1850 fugitive slave law would have especially enraged Douglass, given that he himself was a fugitive slave. And so, as he nears the conclusion of his 1852 speech, he speaks with the urgency required of the moment. He says, quote, "At a time like this, it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake," end quote. So I want you to consider the force and religious symbolism of Douglass's words. We need a storm, a whirlwind, an earthquake. He calls not for a gentle shower, but for thunder. He may as well have said that we need a flood. Yet it is the first part of his call that I want to uplift for the remainder of my time today, and that is Douglass's demand that it is not light that is needed, but fire. One way to get a fire is to strike a match. So I want to elaborate on several key moments in the long archive of Black revolutionary thought and action where an invocation was made to strike a match. What I hope to make clear by narrating these various moments is the centrality of spirituality, of a spirituality that collectively we who name ourselves as opponents to slavery in all of its present manifestations, that we have sort of lost sight of. In essence, I want to make a case before you for not for the spiritual, but for the spirit-full. And the grandest example of this spirit-full effort to strike a match comes during the Second American War for Slavery, which many know as the Civil War. But I contend, following the brilliant scholarship of W.E.B. Du Bois, that the Confederate States of America launched their secession to fight for slavery. But you don't need to take my words for it. Listen to this clause from Article 4 of the Constitution of the Confederate States of America. It reads, in quote, "In all such territory, the institution of Negro slavery, as it now exists in the Confederate States, shall be recognized and protected by Congress and by the territorial government," end quote. The Civil War was a war for slavery. The Confederate Army attempted to do what Washington's army did some 85 years prior, which is to establish a republic rooted in slavery. It's just that the Confederate States stated this more explicitly than did the Americans during the first American War for Slavery. Now, although the Confederate States of America launched its war for slavery, the US government was not readily fighting a war against slavery. Abraham Lincoln, a man who promised to uphold the fugitive slave law and who enjoyed watching minstrel shows, vowed that he would maintain slavery if he could keep the Union intact. But something changed, and the change was that of the 4 million black people enslaved in the South, roughly 10% of them embarked on what the aforementioned W.E.B. Du Bois called a general strike. I know that as of late, the term general strike has been making its way around the news. But when you know about the long tradition of the general strike and the pantheon of black radicalism, you might rethink whether that's what's unfolded in Minneapolis and in many other places. As Du Bois shows, 400,000 enslaved people simply walked off the plantation, a move that almost immediately shifted the tide of the war. By not only stopping work, but also critiquing the conditions of work writ large, the enslaved became the decisive factor in forcing the Union to fight a war against slavery. Du Bois would later go on to say that Abraham Lincoln did not have the power to free the slaves because the slaves had already freed themselves. Said another way, the enslaved realized it was time to strike a match. Scholars writing after W.E.B. Du Bois have shown that central to the enslaved's decision to strike a match was the roots of their religion. These networks and traditions included but far exceeded Christianity. The general strike, the first and most successful one in history, could not have prevailed absent of a spirit-full people. And just over 100 years later, there was a Southern preacher and doctor educated at a school on the Red Clay Hills in Georgia who made a similar call for a general strike. His name was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Many do not know that King's life after the 1964 Civil Rights Act and the 1965 Voting Rights Act took a quite different turn. His wife, Coretta Scott King, who was his intellectual peer, pushed him on his stance regarding the Vietnam War. And who in here can speak to the power of your wife to make you a better man? In addition to his changed views on Vietnam, MLK took his organizing to the city of Chicago to bring attention to unfair and racist housing policies. Perhaps if we had taken King's work seriously then, our country wouldn't be run by a Long Island man whose name first appeared in newspapers due to unfair and racist housing policies. But in addition to opposing the Vietnam War and fighting for fair housing in Chicago, King set his sights on the most important struggle for black people in the country, if not the world, the Mississippi Delta. This region then and now ranks as the most impoverished of any in the United States and one of the most oppressed in the world. The queen city of the Mississippi Delta is Memphis, Tennessee, and that is where King's call took him in 1968 to stand alongside sanitation workers who were on strike for a union that would protect them from hazardous work conditions and provide them with a living wage. On March 18, 1968, Dr. King made one of his many trips to Memphis, and this time he delivered a speech entitled, "All Labor Has Dignity." Echoing the urgency of Frederick Douglass from 1852, King concluded his speech by saying, quote, "You may have to escalate the struggle a bit. If they keep refusing and they would not recognize the union and would not agree for the checkoff of the collection of dues, I tell you what you ought to do. And you are together here enough to do it. In a few days, you ought to get together and just have a general work stoppage in the city of Memphis," end quote. 2 weeks later, King was killed in Memphis. I argue that his call for a general strike is the catalyzing reason for his assassination. King, relying on his faith tradition, attempted to strike a match from a spirit-full place. But King was not the first with Memphis ties to call for a general strike. That distinction is owed to someone who was mentioned earlier in this service and that is the anti-lynching crusader Ida B. Wells-Barnett. And I say crusader intentionally because that term is indeed how she framed her work, as a holy war against the abomination of lynching. Ida B. Wells-Barnett is less well known than she should be. As was stated earlier, she was born in Mississippi during the Second American War for Slavery. Like many in Mississippi, she eventually made her way to Memphis, where she became a teacher and fierce journalist, chronicling Jim Crow laws in the South. Her journalism came from a personal place. More than a decade before the more famous Homer Plessy of the case Plessy v. Ferguson, Wells-Barnett protested against the segregated rail car, doing so in the 1880s by refusing to give up her seat in the ladies' car. Again, this is 10 years before Homer Plessy and more than 60 years before Rosa Parks. But the cause with which she became most associated was anti-lynching. This too came from a personal place and also a spiritful place. One of her best friends, Thomas Moss Sr., was part owner of a food co-op that provided low-cost, quality food to Black Memphians, many of whom, like Wells-Barnett, were recent migrants from Mississippi. And at this point, I want to take a small aside to say it is ahistorical for anyone to try and drive a wedge between Black people and migrant communities. Because in fact, the Venn diagram between Black people and migrants is a circle. As the late, great Frankie Beverly sang, quote, "We are one," end quote. And so Ida B. Wells-Barnett was with her best friends with Thomas Moss Sr., who was brutally lynched in 1892. And though his murder at the hands of a lynch mob prompted her advocacy against lynching, she, similar to Douglass, she went around the world speaking against this practice of public ritualistic murder of mostly Black men in which white families would attend by the thousands. She, similar to Frederick Douglass, wrote about her campaign. And one of her most well-known publications was the pamphlet Southern Horrors. Frederick Douglass actually wrote a note of support to open the book, which Wells-Barnett concludes with a crescendo that echoes across the annals of Black thought. She says, quote, "To Northern capital and Afro-American labor, the South owes its rehabilitation. If labor is withdrawn, capital will not remain. The Afro-American is thus the backbone of the South. A thorough knowledge and judicious exercise of this power in lynching localities could many times affect a bloodless revolution. The white man's dollar is his God, and to stop this will be to stop the outrages in many localities," end quote. So in this quote, Wells-Barnett is calling for a general strike. She would never return to Memphis again due to the threats placed upon her life. But this did not stop her advocacy, and never did she lose sight of the fact that the campaign against lynching for her had to be a spiritful one. Much like King after her, Wells-Barnett drew attention to the complicity of white churches and white Christians in the practice of lynching. The lynchers, she showed, were priests, parishioners, and folks who fashioned themselves followers of Jesus. Yet she knew a Jesus of justice, and she dared to strike a match. So a Jesus of justice brings me to my third and final example of a Black radical call for a general strike rooted in spiritual abundance. And it actually takes us outside of the United States to the Caribbean island of Jamaica. And because we are in a time when people are saying that Black History Month is focused primarily or exclusively on Black people in the United States, I'm here to remind you that when Dr. Carter G. Woodson created Negro History Week 100 years ago exactly, he intended to uplift the history and life of Black people on every corner of this planet. So that's an important point of information. So in Jamaica in 1762, a man by the name of Robert Wedderburn was born under circumstances similar to Frederick Douglass. His enslaved mother had been violated by a white enslaver, yet unlike Douglass, Robert Wedderburn himself was not enslaved. But this fact did not stop him from speaking out against slavery. It may have actually catalyzed it. From his non-enslaved position, he deplored the violence suffered against his mother and grandmother, the latter of whom was likely a practitioner of obeah. By 1817, Robert Wedderburn began publishing a periodical entitled "The Axe Laid to the Root," end quote. The title here merits meditation. This is a phrase from the New Testament in the book of Matthew, the 3rd chapter and the 10th verse. The New International Version reads, quote, "The axe is already at the root of the trees, and every tree that does not produce good fruit will be cut down and thrown into the fire." So what does John the Baptist mean here? He means that a life lived devoid of God's purpose will be cut down and cast into the fire. This is the context Wedderburn uses to urge slaves and non-slaves alike to engage in a general strike. He advocates, quote, "A day wherein you all will pretend to sleep. The universality of your sleeping will strike terror to your oppressors. Repeat it once a year till you obtain your liberty. Union among you will strike tremendous terror to the receivers of stolen persons," end quote. Wedderburn's effort to strike a match resulted in the Baptist War began in Jamaica on Christmas Day, 1831. It began as a general strike and resulted in the eventual British abolition of slavery throughout its empire. So where does this leave us? We're in the 250th anniversary of the founding of the Republic, and like then, there are currently people waging a war for slavery. They have rekindled it, they have transformed it, but it is at its root a war for slavery. Thus, the contradiction emerges: we can't fight a war with war, right? We need a fight against slavery, and I am making a case that spirit has to be the center of that fight, just as it was for enslaved and non-enslaved people combating chattel slavery, as was Robert Wedderburn, lynching, as was Ida B. Wells-Barnett, and wage slavery, as was Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. And as of this moment, those who will call ourselves opposed to slavery, we are quite frankly losing that battle. Thus, the overall point of my message is this: we are in need of paradigm-shifting action. And one such action in the arsenal of Black radicalism has been the broadly conceived strike. But a strike of any consequence can only prevail if the spiritual and cultural conditions are cultivated to sustain it. This nation will either kill us all, or we will develop, as was mentioned in the song, a different way to build on this land. Thus, the charge is ours to create something new, to advance and practice new theories of relating. And we are up against not just a singular nation, but a form of power in which the nation state is its present articulation. Yet that is beginning to shift. The power is about the power to make slaves out of others, to violate them, to separate them from families, and to ridicule them. And given that I started with Frederick Douglass, it is here that I want to conclude by reading a poem from the appendix of his first autobiography. Douglass titled this poem a parody, and I want you to hear the resonances to today. "Come, saints and sinners, hear me tell, how pious priests whip jack and nail, and women buy and children sell, and preach all sinners down to hell, and sing of heavenly union. They'll bleat and baa, go on like goats, gorge down black sheep and strain at moats, array their backs in fine black coats, then seize their Negroes by their throats, and choke for heavenly union. They'll church you if you sip a dram, and damn you if you steal a lamb, yet rob old Tony, Dole, and Sam of human rights and bread and ham. Kidnappers, heavenly union. They'll loudly talk of Christ's reward and bind his image with a cord, and scold and swing the lash aboard, and sell their brother in the Lord to handcuffed heavenly union. They'll read and sing a sacred song and make a prayer both loud and long, and teach the right and do the wrong, hailing the brother, sister throng with words of heavenly union. We wonder how such saints can sing or praise the Lord upon the wing, who roar and scold and whip and sting until their slaves and mammon cling in guilty conscience union. They'll raise tobacco, corn, and rye, and drive and thieve and cheat and lie. Somebody's listening. And lay up treasures in the sky by making switch and cowskin fly in hope of heavenly union. They'll crack old Tony on the skull and preach and roar like bash and bull, or braying ass of mischief full, then seize O Jacob by the wool and pull for heavily union. A roaring, ranting, sleek man thief who lived on mutton, veal, and beef, yet never would afford relief to needy, sable sons of grief, was big with heavily union. Love not the world, the preacher said, and winked his eye and shook his head. He seized on Tom and Dick and Ned, cut short their meat and clothes and bread, yet still loved heavily union. Another preacher whining spoke of one whose heart for sinners broke. He tied old Nanny to an oak and drew the blood at every stroke and prayed for heavily union. Two others opped their iron jaws and waved their children stealing paws. They sat their children in gewgaws by stinting Negroes' backs and maws. They kept up heavily union. All good from Jack another takes and entertains their flirts and rakes, who dress as sleek as glossy snakes and cram their mouths with sweetened cakes. And this goes down for union. Generations before us have dared to strike a match. We're on the clock next. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful. We are going to sing our final hymn this morning. It is number 211 in the Gray Hymnal. We are climbing Jacob's Ladder. This spiritual speaks of hope and salvation and freedom. And it has been sung since at least 1825 and possibly as far back as 1750. Theologian and civil rights leader Howard Thurman comments about this spiritual. There seems to be, basic to human experience, a kind of optimism about the ultimate destiny of man, sometimes blindly and sometimes with scarce hope of vindication, and often with wild irrationality. The spirit of man does dare to affirm hope. So let us stand in body or in spirit to sing number 211. As we leave this place this morning, I offer you in benediction these good words by Langston Hughes. We have tomorrow bright before us like a flame, yesterday a night gone thing, a sundown name, and dawned today, broad arch above the road we came, march on. So let's wave goodbye to the folks at home. And we will now extinguish this chalice flame, daring to carry forward the vision of our faith that freedom, reason, and justice will one day prevail in this nation and across the earth.
Si faman la cosi, wakunge sabi, si faman la cosi, si awadinga, si faman la cosi, wakunge sabi, si faman la cosi, si awadinga. Oh God, give us power to rip down prisons, oh God, give us power to lift the people, oh God, give us power to rip down prisons, oh God, give us power to lift the people. Oh God, give us courage to withstand hatred, oh God, give us courage not to be bitter, oh God, give us courage to withstand hatred, oh God, give us courage not to be bitter. Oh God, give us power and make us fearless, oh God, give us power, because we need it, oh God, give us power, and make us fearless, oh God, give us power, because we need it. Si faman la cosi, wakunge sabi, si faman la cosi, si awadinga, si faman la cosi, wakunge sabi, si faman la cosi, si awadinga.